What's up, everybody? We are back with another edition of DNVR Rams Live. As always, I am your host, Justin Michael. Hope everybody's enjoying their week so far. Gorgeous Wednesday morning up here in the wonderful northern Colorado. We've got a lot to dive into today. We're going to talk ESPN win projections, give some thoughts on what ESPN thinks about CSU going into the year, some of the teams they're higher on than I am, some of the teams I'm higher on than they are, all of that fun stuff. We are going to talk conference realignment. Earlier in the week, it came out that CSU, Utah State, San Diego State, Boise State, and Fresno State officially filed the paperwork to leave the Mountain West Conference. Not shocking or anything like that. They had to do so by June 1st. Otherwise, those exit fees would have doubled, essentially gone from about $18 to $36 million. It's one of those storylines that's never ending. There's a lot of layers to it. This is actually part of what is at contention in the lawsuit from these departing members. Is the reason they didn't file the paperwork up until now is they wanted to keep those board seats, obviously. And there's allegations of the Mountain West schools like UNLV and some of the schools that are going to be sticking around, basically having meetings without these departing schools and some collusion stuff. So it's going to be interesting to see how all of this gets sorted out in the long run. Obviously, the Pac-12 and Mountain West are currently undergoing mediation regarding those poaching penalties. So there's still a lot to be sorted out here, but this is a significant step in the process, and we'll kind of talk about what the implications are, what this could mean for the next move for the Pac-12. Do you think we'll get that 8th member on the football side sooner rather than later, as well as a media deal? We'll get into all of that. I did briefly, just here in the intro, before we dive into everything else and before I forget, I wanted to give just a couple of final thoughts on the whole Sonny Lubick to the College Football Hall of Fame debate. This was something I basically spent the first half of the show talking about on Friday, so I don't want to be too repetitive. I wasn't quite as articulate as I hoped to be. I just feel like I got worked up and didn't make all the points that I wanted to, at least as well as I think I could. But the summary of how I feel, and just kind of putting a bow on this topic for now, because it's not something I'm ever going to let go. He deserves to be in. My greatest frustration is just the arbitrary nature of it all. And I don't mean that as a slight at Mike Leach, and this is kind of where I got derailed a little bit and went on some random tangents, but you can't tell the history of college football without somebody like Mike Leach. I think it's really cool that as a college football society, however you want to phrase it, the college football world cared enough about Mike Leach to make sure that he is being recognized for what he contributed to college football. Obviously, the air raid has great roots in the entire game today, and including the NFL. You look at how many offenses have some form of mesh in there. It's undeniable the impact that Mike Leach had on college football. I'm very glad to see him honored. None of this is meant to disparage him, to try and diminish his legacy or his impact or anything like that. Where my frustration stems from is the arbitrary decision to drop the win percentage just slightly from 600 to 595 for Mike Leach, because where do you draw the line? Like, yes, you can't tell the history of college football without Mike Leach, but you certainly can't tell the history of college football without Sonny Lubick, without Rocky Long, a lot of these other great coaches who are just barely being kept out. I mean, now that it's been changed, Sonny legitimately needs one more win. That's what this hard line means. And I guess to me, that's just frustrating, because very clearly it's a more nuanced conversation than, well, if Sonny had just one more game, then he's a Hall of Famer and end a discussion. Like that just seems absurd to me because again, I think that winning isn't equal everywhere. And when you recognize what Sonny's legacy is at CSU specifically, what he did to elevate a football program that historically had done basically nothing before him, other than Earl Bruce. I do want to make sure that Brucey gets his proper recognition as well. He took CSU to the first ever bowl game in 1990, that Freedom Bowl matchup against Oregon. Great game. I think you can watch it on YouTube still. Uh, Epic uniform matchup in the worst way possible. I think Earl kind of laid a foundation that showed what could potentially be possible if you actually had a competent football coach. Sonny comes over from the University of Miami after winning a couple of national championships as a DC and builds this program into something that it had never been, realistically, something it may never be again. And it just bums me out that something as arbitrary as winning or losing one game is going to be what keeps him out, especially when I think back to just that frustrating stretch from like 2004 to 2007, the end of his tenure. There were so many coin flip games that CSU lost that if any one of those ends up going their way, he's in the Hall of Fame right now. I don't want to get too repetitive again. I know I've made a lot of these points already, so we will move on. But I wanted to be a little bit more succinct there and just explain what my frustration stems from. And I guess I'll wrap it up by just saying any system that doesn't recognize a coach of Sonny's status, a man of his character, it's not a worthwhile system to me. And I think it's the perfect example of how flawed this whole process is. And it just bums me out because I think the further we get away from Sonny's career, the less likely it is that he is going to get his rightful place in the College Football Hall of Fame. I just think that one of the things that worked in Leach's factor here, and again, I have nothing but love for Leach. I'm not trying to make this against him. It's just the recency bias of it all. He was a quirky dude who we all watched on SportsCenter and saw Twitter clips of, consistently over the last decade, whether it be his rants or his crazy, tangents. Like the Pac-12 mascots in a brawl was one of the famous ones that he went viral for. And I think all of that worked in his favor. Whereas, we're close to 2 decades removed now from Sonny's last game on the sidelines. I just think he's getting lost in the shuffle a little bit, because I think if you asked anybody that was associated with the game during his period, they understand how great he was. There's a lot of coaches that understand it. I would really hope someday that the College Football Hall of Fame either gets rid of that hardline win percentage altogether or recognizes, some of the other wonky stuff like I brought up in 1997. CU's win over CSU is technically a forfeit in that NCAA record books. If you're CSU, can you just claim that? Can that be the one win that allows him to get over the line? I don't know. That's a whole different debate. That's, again, there's just so many factors that go into that, and it's kind of like the weird way that CSU and Wyoming do the history of the border war. Wyoming technically forfeited the first matchup, so it should be a win for CSU. Wyoming does count it in the all-time record as a win for CSU. CSU, who it would benefit to count, does not count it. And I don't know, the whole process just seems so silly to me when you look at the wonkiness of it all. CD Sticks in the Toyota chat says, I'm really worried he will only get recognized once he passes and people start sharing their admiration for him. I think that's a really astute observation or really great comment. I'm right there with you. I talked about that a little bit on last Friday's show, but it'll break my heart if it's a Pat Bowlen situation where he only gets in either after he's passed or after, he's not in a state where he's able to fully appreciate it. I mean, I was around Sonny a couple times in the last year, and the man still got it. He's still sharp as a whip, still a phenomenal storyteller, still has all the charisma and the kind energy that, you've heard the stories about him, and he's still got it. And it would just be so cool to see somebody who did things the right way and has lived his life the right way and has done so many great things for the community to just get his moment. I guarantee you it matters a hell of a lot more to people like me, to the fan base, than it does to Sonny Lubick. I'm sure he would appreciate the recognition. I don't think it's a situation where he's losing sleep over it or anything like that. I'm sure he's pretty sure of himself and recognizes exactly what he accomplished and how special it was and how unique it was. But again, I just keep coming back to any system that doesn't recognize the legacy of Sonny Lubick, the greatness of that man. That's not a worthwhile system. And that's my 2 cents. That's where I stand on it. I will move on. We already spent a lot of time on this in the last couple of weeks, but it's just something I've been thinking a lot about lately. And obviously, we're biased as CSU supporters. Like, he's our guy. He always will be. We're always going to pound the table for him. But from an objective standpoint, you look at what he did from a successful period, that decade, 94 through 2005, basically, just the standard of consistency. It was incredible. All right, we'll move on. We'll get into some of this other stuff. I could probably talk about this for 15 minutes every single show if I wanted to. It's something that's near and dear to me. I'm very passionate. I don't have the largest platform in the world. I'm not Dan Patrick. I'm not Adam Schefter. I don't think me publicly voicing my opinion is going to have enough pull to shift anything or anything like that. I'm well aware of that. But what I can do is use the platform that I have to preach his legacy and hopefully pass on a little bit of that wisdom to, some of the younger students and the younger CSU listeners. Again, a lot of you probably never had an opportunity to do a, real deep dive on what Sonny's career was, but really is one of the most incredible men that's ever coached college football, that's ever coached any sport, period, at a high level. All right. Got my Rockies hat on today. If you missed it, the Rockies won a series, hang the banner, their first series win since September of 2024. If they pull off the sweep today, I think the Rockies are actually playing right now. Weird East Coast game in Miami. If they pulled off the sweep, it would be their first sweep in over a calendar year, which is just, it's so sad. They swept the I think it was the Padres and the Rangers of like mid-May last year, just on an unprecedented run here of disappointment and losing. It's brutal. I talk about it a lot in the newsletter. I'm really in a weird place when it comes to my Rockies fandom. I was obsessed with the team for the vast majority of my life. I love baseball. I think it's a great sport. Still do. I miss it. My anger and frustration is more with upper management and ownership than it is with the players. So it's not like I'm actively rooting for the team to lose in that sense. From a human standpoint, I thought it was cool to see those guys finally get a series win. I mean, I can only imagine what they've been through, what it's like day after day. I mean, you're playing 6-7 games a week, just knowing that it's going to be 3 hours of brutalness. Like, from a human standpoint, happy for the team in that sense. I also kind of, the sarcastic part of me is like, woohoo, hang the banner, they won, yay. Now what? It's just kind of anticlimactic feeling, and it made me start thinking about some of the more anticlimactic wins from a CSU football standpoint over the last couple of decades. Series or years where you lose like 7-8 games in a row and then you win some meaningless game, and it's like, yes, we won. I want to celebrate a win. A win is a win. I always preach that, especially in the down years. Like, you've got to be able to enjoy the good moments when they actually come. And that's what I would say to anybody that's still a young Rockies fan and not jaded in any way. Like, take that win, celebrate it. If you're still passionately rooting for that team, who cares what anybody else says? A win is a win. But you also just know that in the grand scheme of things, it changes absolutely nothing. Really doesn't mean anything. It's anticlimactic, and that just made me think it could be a fun off-season topic. So I'll throw out a couple of examples of this. We'll go down memory lane a little bit, then we'll get into those ESPN projections. We'll talk conference realignment. everything that we have already teased. Real quick, let's shout out a couple of our partners and we'll jump back into this and keep the fun rolling. Mando is a men's deodorant brand hyper-focused on keeping every aspect of a man's body smelling fresh and clean, and they really do mean every single aspect. Your armpits, your balls, your butt, your grundle, all those stink zones. And the closer we get to July, the closer we get to those triple-digit temperatures, it's never more important than to make sure you're rocking deodorant than in the heart of summer. I know there's some people who are like hippity dippity and I don't need it. Yes, you do. You're stinky. Nobody wants to smell that. They've got lots of great scents: bourbon leather, Cloverwoods, Mount Fuji, Pro Sport. Don't ruin everybody else's vibe with your smelly self. This stuff actually works. It was created by a doctor who saw firsthand how BO was being misdiagnosed and mistreated. What's cool is Mando's starter pack. It's a great way to test out some of their products. They've got cream tube deodorant, solid stick deodorant. You're going to get both of those with the starter pack, but you can also pick a couple of products of your choice as well, like mini body wash, deodorant wipes. You're going to get free shipping as well. Use that code DNVR at shopmando.com. That's shopmando.com. Please support our show. Tell them we sent you. Smell fresher, stay drier, boost your confidence from head to toe with Mando. Timeouts are for sports, not banking. That's why First Bank offers you the tools and services to take control of your money wherever you are. With their secure, easy-to-use mobile banking app, you can check your balance, pay friends, and stay on top of your money anytime, anywhere. It's banking that moves with you. Here's something extra. If you open a First Bank checking account, you can earn $300. It's a simple way to kickstart better banking, to enjoy a little reward for making a smart money move. If you're ready to take your banking to the next level, check out efirstbank.com/bonus. That's efirstbank.com/bonus to learn more and get started. Better banking is just a few taps away with First Bank. Certain restrictions and requirements do apply. Member FDIC. Okay, let's get into it. The most anticlimactic feeling wins for CSU football. This is really only about a 20-ish year sample size. Most of these are along the lines of it was a miserable, rotten, awful season, but they pulled off this win. And for that day, we didn't feel like losers, but whoop-de-doo in the end. There are years like that. I mean, that's just the reality as a sports fan. More times than not, it's going to be heartache, disappointment, frustration. Sometimes it's going to be full-on embarrassment and exhaustion. As a Rockies fan, we're definitely in that stretch right now, but there have been some pretty tough times on the CSU side as well, which I don't need to tell any of you. So let's go back to the 2022 regular season finale. This is the end of year one under Jay Norvell. You got to remember that there was a lot of excitement when Norvell came in. Your post Steve Adazio, which was to this day the biggest boneheaded decision this university has ever made. It was a hire that never made sense from the beginning, had no ties to the region. Even from a PR standpoint, like there just wasn't much you could sell. I don't get it. Really comes down to Urban getting his boy the gig. But obviously the 2022 season itself was a train wreck. And Norvell inherited an absolute dumpster fire. I've been very open about that. I don't think there was a great opportunity for pretty much anybody to be competitive in 2022, but that was only made worse by the fact that you had all these players who they invested in spring ball and fall camp and wasted all these reps on deciding to quit the team in the non-conference slate after, I mean, we all remember September 2022 was ugly, get throttled by Washington State. I mean, even Sacramento State comes into Fort Collins and just dog walks the Rams. I mean, it was awful. They were not in a competitive standpoint. The trenches were a mess. They didn't have the depth pretty much anywhere to be a competitive football team. And then you lose Ty McCullough and you lose Dante Wright and Taiwan Francis and all kinds of guys. And I'm not trying to single any of those guys out. All those guys I enjoyed covering, especially Ty and Dante. I thought they were really good kids. And from their standpoint, individually, I kind of understood it. They had already played for two different coaches. They'd played for like 4 or 5 offensive coordinators at that point. They'd been through a lot, and they just decided that a change of scenery was what was best for them, and it worked out okay. Dante had a nice stretch at Temple. Ty had a really nice stretch with Montana State. Seems like he digs it. But it left CSU in a really bad spot. And they had to play a ton of receivers that were not even remotely ready to be on the field. They had guys who were not fully in the playbook. Like they were just trying to throw bodies out there and get through the year. And it was brutal. Like there were a couple of fun moments. You beat Hawaii at home. You win a really weird game in Reno, which I've talked about before, deceptively felt like a much bigger deal than it really was in the grand scheme of things. But you had all this tension between CSU and Nevada. Their coach is talking shit in the preseason, has a spicy moment with Norvell pregame and at midfield. Like there was just so much going on with that in terms of the dramatic storylines. But they did close the 2022 season with a 17-0 win over New Mexico. It was one of those situations where if you're a Ram fan, you're kind of looking around like, well, at least we're not UNM. As much as this season sucked, at least we're not UNM. And we did what we were supposed to in that one. Shutout always feels good, especially at home. But it was just one of the longer seasons in recent memory. It was rough. Everybody was worn down. Everybody was ready to be in the offseason and just put it behind us. But thankful not to lose that one. It was kind of the Chase Wilson breakout game. If you remember back, I think he had like 2.5 sacks in that game. Daquan Jackson post game, had a ton of high praise for him and basically was like, look out, this guy's got next. He was right. Ended up being a significant contributor for CSU each of the following 2 seasons. But yeah, that 2022 shutout win over New Mexico was kind of the definition of this topic, which is just a rare moment of reprise and just a god awful season. 2018, not that different. It wasn't the season finale, but the Rams won 20-18 over New Mexico. I had forgotten this until I went back and looked on YouTube, but if you go back and look up the highlights for that game, CSU is wearing what I would argue is maybe the worst uniform combo they've ever rocked, which was the gray pants with green jerseys, and the green helmet looked absolutely atrocious. They did some really weird stuff with the grays over the years. I actually thought the gray pants, white jersey, white helmet combo was kind of cool that they wore. I think that was in Boise one time. It was an awful game. That might have been the Avery Williams disaster where CSU had like 3 punts blocked and gave up a punt return for a touchdown. But the gray pants, green jerseys was not that was not a vibe. That was not a good look. Really ugly game. CSU goes up like 2 touchdowns at halftime, but then just does nothing in the second half. That 2018 team was not my favorite. Some good guys on that team who I still consider friends to this day. I mean, you got to remember I was still a student, so I'm in classes with a lot of those guys. But I also had a first row seat to the lack of work ethic from some of the guys in the locker room. We'll just say that's a team that definitely quit the last month or so. Was just awful. But they did get this 20-18, I think it was homecoming win over New Mexico. They ended up winning on a walk-off. Wyatt Bryan kicks the game-winning field goal. He'd missed a chip shot to take the lead like 2 or 3 minutes before. Defense stepped up. They get a 4-and-out. New Mexico goes for it on 4th down, trying to step on CSU's throat, pull off their first win since 2009, I think it was, over the Rams. And instead, CSU ends up pulling it out in the end. Good for them, but again, like in a 3-9 year, 4-8, whatever it was. Woohoo! Hang the banner. 2017 San Jose State definitely fits this different context because that was still a good team. They won 7 games. This wasn't 2022. This wasn't 2018. This wasn't the last 3 years of the Fairchild era, which we're about to touch on. But it was senior day, and it was coming off of the 3-game losing streak to Air Force, Wyoming, and then the Boise State collapse, which was just the cherry on top of it all. Air Force comes in, humbles you real quick, because you got to remember, CSU started the league slate with a 4-game winning streak coming out of that trip to Tuscaloosa. Air Force comes in, runs it down their throat, typical to what we had seen in that matchup in the Bobo era. They go up to Laramie. They lose in a whiteout against Josh Allen, blow another game that they had an opportunity to win. One of the more frustrating moments of the Bobo era that kind of gets overshadowed a little bit because of what was to come, which was the disaster of a 28-3 blown lead against Boise State. Still led by double digits with 2 minutes left in regulation. The fact that they managed to blow that, I'll still never be able to quite comprehend everything that went wrong for CSU that night. Every ball bounced Boise's way. Everything that could have gone wrong did go wrong. But it was what it was, and it just was a big old bucket of water on what was an exciting season, because even after Air Force and Wyoming had CSU beaten Boise that night, they would have had a spot in the Mountain West Championship. Instead, we know what happens. They do thump San Jose State 42-14 the next week, but coming off of that 3-game losing streak, after all the excitement you had, I mean, they went down and they gave Bama the best game in Tuscaloosa that anybody gave them all season. It just felt like there was so much meat left on the bone that year. I think if you play that season out 100 times, they probably at least make the championship game 80 to 90 times, if not more. And this was just one of those weird anomalies. And unfortunately, it proved to be a living nightmare for Ram fans. 2011, the end of the Fairchild era, one of multiple seasons in which they lost 9 straight games to close the year. But 2011, they start 3-1 before losing 9 straight. They had wins over CU and Nevada in 2009. They were 3-0 and did the exact same thing. That was a Kaepernick-led Nevada team too. That was pretty good. But in 2011, you start 3-1. That was capped off with a 35-34 win over Utah State. Utah State was still in the WAC at that point. That was before they'd even joined the Mountain West. A September win feels a little bit weird putting it in this debate, just because of the fact that you still technically had plenty of opportunities to turn the season around. This isn't like a senior day, finale like we talked about a second ago, but along the same vein, 2007 Georgia Southern felt meh at the time. In hindsight, I'm really glad they won it, despite how frustrating that year was. And there were so many things that just played out unlucky for CSU that season. I've talked about it a lot. That was one of the weirder seasons for college football nationally as a whole, too. Retroactively, I'm just happy that Sonny went out with 2 straight wins, that he beat Georgia Southern, that he beat Wyoming, and that he was able to go out on top. Still breaks my heart the way the tenure ended, but I'll throw that in there. It had been a very frustrating season. You knew that there wasn't going to be postseason or anything like that. But at least they didn't lose to Georgia Southern in Fort Collins. The last one I'll bring up is 2004 UNLV. In between getting throttled by Utah and Air Force, you had a 45-10 win over UNLV, who I had a lot of hate in my heart for, just because they ruined CSU's chance to run the slate in 2002. CSU actually got them back in Vegas in 2003 with a 1-point win. But the season started with the heartbreaker in Boulder, Marcus Houston. I don't know why I was thinking Justin Houston. Marcus Houston, former CU running back, who had transferred to CSU back when that was still like a scandalous thing to do, gets tackled shy of the goal line at the 1-yard line as time expires. If they ran the right play, walks into the end zone untouched. One of the more painful, sports losses of my lifetime, really a defining moment in my childhood. And that sounds dramatic, but it's true. I mean, I'm 9. That 2004 showdown taught me exactly what sports are, which is often a brutal, brutal existence. But the season starts with that, and in between that and then getting throttled by Utah and Air Force, it just never really got better. At least they had that 45-10 win over UNLV, but that was just a weird year in general. If you remember back, you lose a heartbreaker in Boulder. The next week, you play number 1 USC on the road on ABC, lose 49-0. After that, you have to go to Minneapolis, play Lawrence Maroney in Minnesota. He runs wild. That game wasn't even on TV. I think I listened to it on the radio. Just a really weird year. And if you can't tell, 2 decades later, those memories are still very much ingrained in my brain. But I don't know. I thought it'd be kind of a fun off-season topic. I didn't include 2018 Arkansas just because it was September. And you beat an SEC team, which, regardless of how awful the year went, it's kind of like beating CU or Wyoming. You're always going to take an SEC win as a Mountain West school. But yeah, those are some of the more anticlimactic feeling wins for CSU football the last 2 decades. Very similar to the Rockies winning a series this week. Woo! Hang the banner. All right, we're going to keep it moving here. We're going to shout out a couple of our partners. Keep the questions, comments rolling in the Toyota chat. If I don't respond to it immediately, we'll star it and come back to it. Let's shout out a couple of other partners real quick. Just like your favorite team needs a home field advantage, your home needs a home floor advantage, and Empire Today can help you get it. Empire Today has flooring experts, dedicated flooring professionals who focus on flooring every single day. We've all been to those big box stores. You wander aisles endlessly. Somehow you're hauling all these materials home, looking for an installer and coordinating everything yourself. On top of that, maybe they have a flooring department, but can you really trust that who you're speaking to in those box stores is an expert or even knows, remotely what they're talking about in that field? It's always just kind of a gamble. Empire Today, they live and breathe flooring. This is what they do. They'll be with you every single step of the way. It's just a completely different ballgame. Schedule a free in-home estimate today because some things are better at home. DNVR listeners can get a $350 discount when using that promo code DNVR. Yes, you heard right. A $350 discount with the promo code DNVR. Restrictions do apply. Visit EmpireToday/DNVR for details. I also want to talk to you guys about Toyota, the official vehicle of DNVR. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA. For generations, Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. What's awesome about Toyota is they're perfect for Colorado living. They've got vehicles that are great to explore the mountains in, that you can take out on some of those, county roads on the Eastern Plains, that you can take up into, Rocky Mountain National Park, but are not going to be an issue if you're cruising around downtown or if you're, in Fort Collins or Littleton or you name it, where parking might be a little bit tighter. Toyota's got 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive, like the Epic 4Runner, again, really are the perfect Colorado vehicle. 16 hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail. Toyota's proud partner of CSU Athletics and the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. All right, big shout out to my guy Taylor, longtime supporter of the DNVR Rams podcast, always rocking live with us. He says, any notable recruits visiting this weekend? I'm going to get into some recruiting stuff tomorrow. I think I mentioned this last week, but we're going to be live Wednesday, Thursday this week, and Thursday, Friday next week. Normally it's Wednesday, Friday, obviously, but I'm going to be out of town doing some stuff with family. So we're going Wednesday, Thursday this week, and then Thursday, Friday next week. I'll tweet it a couple of times, but just keep all of that in mind. We'll talk plenty of recruiting tomorrow. Definitely that time of year. Going to be a lot of, important 2026 prospects on campus over these next couple of weeks. I do want to shout out Barry Wesley, by the way, CSU alum. He was named the UFL Sportsman of the Year for the Birmingham Stallions, which recognizes excellence on the field and commitment to community. Barry's an awesome guy. I have been fortunate to know him since he was about 6 years old. He and my younger brother played football and baseball together. They were in choir together. They grew up together. So I've had a kind of a front row seat to his rise over the years. It's been really cool, and it couldn't have happened to a better guy. I'm still holding out hope that somebody with his work ethic and his versatility, you got to remember, he's somebody that can play inside or outside. I think he could do center if he really had to. I'm hoping that he can land in a spot that works for him in the NFL. Keeping that dream alive, though, getting valuable reps and experience in the UFL, and cool to see him continuing to do all the right things. All right, let's talk conference realignment, and then we will finish the show with ESPN projections. I'll kind of give some thoughts on how ESPN views CSU, as well as some of the other schools around the league. We talked about this a little bit last week too, with some of the win totals, just some of the teams that the metrics are higher on versus some of the teams that I'm higher on, versus just eye test and what we know about some of these coaches and whatnot. But as I mentioned earlier, mediation currently in process regarding the poaching penalties, about $55 million potentially on the line. If you're the Mountain West, the Pac-12 schools will argue that it is unconstitutional and unenforceable, as we have all basically said for a year now, outside of the folks that are, too firmly entrenched on either side to be able to kind of see through the mess of all this. Like, it was always going to end with some type of compromise. It was never going to be a scenario where it was just a slam dunk win for the Pac-12 or the Mountain West. So it's going to be a situation where in some elements, the Pac-12 is going to feel like they won, and in some elements, the Mountain West is going to feel like they won. And if you're the Mountain West, you're just trying to maximize the payday that you're able to get out of this. You got a really raw deal if you are one of the Mountain West schools that's getting left behind in all of this, and I want to be aware of that. And I don't want to be ignorant. I love the Mountain West Conference as is. It's all I've really ever known. I love a lot of these schools. I've got friends in Albuquerque. I've got friends in Nevada. I've got friends in Laramie even. And I'm aware that this puts their futures in really weird spots. You go from playing Boise State and CSU and San Diego State to being associated with UTEP and Northern Illinois, as a football only member. And that sucks. And I recognize that. And a part of me would have been completely fine had it just been a reverse merger. I understand the logic behind not wanting it and wanting to basically, and when I say this, there's really not any way to hear it and not be offended if you're one of these other schools. But when I say something like trim the fat, I really just mean the schools like CSU and San Diego State invest in athletics at a far greater rate than schools like San Jose State, like the University of Nevada, like Hawaii. And if it's a modern arms race, which it is, like we all know what it is at this point, you want to be associated with schools that are going to be willing to bet on themselves and try and keep up rather than being stuck and dragged down by schools who probably look at the scene right now and recognize, we kind of are what we are. I'm not sure we're going to factor into this next level of things. So like, why spend more money? And I understand the logic behind that. If you're some of these schools, especially if you're a San Jose State, for instance, who just doesn't have a consistent supporter base, like there aren't fans in the stands. Why are we going to spend millions of dollars and gamble on ourselves? Nobody's watching. I get all that. But if you're the Pac-12 schools, is that who you want to be associated with? And that's kind of what I've always argued. It's not perfect. It's not the Pac-12 of the past. You don't have USC. You don't have UCLA. You don't even Stanford and Cal and some of those great brands that have been lost because of all the shuffling that's gone down these last couple of years. And it all goes back to, Texas, you jump into the SEC. And ever since then, it's just been nothing but chaos. Oregon and USC and Washington, and they all end up in the Big Ten. A bunch of schools go to the Big 12. You guys know the deal. But it's been a chain reaction here, and we're starting to get a little bit closer to some sort of resolution, or at least a little bit more clarity on what the future is going to look like for the Mountain West and for the Pac-12 conferences. Mediation began in May. It's in the process right now. Who knows how long that's going to take? I mean, it could be months, it could be a year, who knows? But they did have to officially file that paperwork. CSU, Boise, Fresno, Utah State, San Diego State, all the departing schools, they had to file it before June 1st, because if they didn't, those exit fees go from 18 to 36 million. You still don't know how much you're going to pay in poaching fees. My guess is you meet somewhere in the middle, some type of compromise. I don't think the Mountain West is going to get that full 55 million. I don't think they're going to walk away with nothing either. I just think that would be unrealistic. Up until now, schools like CSU, schools like San Diego State, they still had a board seat, which meant they were still actively involved in the process of decisions for the future of the league, which put some of those other schools in a weird spot. And I totally get that. Why, if you're UNLV, if you're Air Force, you're probably like, screw these guys. I don't want to be associated with them. There probably were a lot of conversations behind the scenes happening that may or may not have been above board in terms of what the legal process is supposed to be. And if you're CSU, if you're Fresno, you're going to try and use that to your advantage too. Like, you understand the human side of things of why they're like, screw these guys, they're leaving us. Why should they get to be here? But that's how the process works. That's how the guidelines are written in. And until you formally file notice of your intent to depart, you are within good standing of the league, and having it come out publicly, that doesn't matter. It's not the official paperwork. The writing was on the wall. Everybody knew what was going to happen, but it wasn't official until now. What this means, there's basically no chance of the reverse merger happening. What this means is there's no turning back. If you're CSU, if you're Utah State, if you're these departing schools, like you're all in now. We knew it was going to be a gamble. We knew it was these schools betting on themselves, but technically there could have been a way out, in the past couple of months. Now this is happening. We're rebuilding the Pac-12 for better or for worse. This is going to be the move. Now, the fact that these 5 schools did it and UNLV was not a part of that, that makes me, I guess I shouldn't say 100% certain, but basically 100% certain that the Rebels will not be in the Pac-12 in 2026. They signed the GOR a couple of months back, which gave those remaining Mountain West schools the media rights for the Mountain West like through 2032. So the writing on the wall had been kind of there with that too, and I don't think that's shocking or anything like that. But a lot of us were holding on to a little bit of hope that maybe UNLV would come to their senses, and instead of taking the big bag of cash now, they'd be thinking more long term with their vision. That's an athletic department that is just bleeding money, so I kind of get the logic of it, but I think you're committing to being on a sinking ship essentially. But it is what it is. UNLV, Air Force seems like they're in it for the long haul with the Mountain West, unless like the Big 12 or somebody comes knocking down the line. I don't see that happening. We'll see, but doesn't seem like UNLV anytime soon is going to be in this Pac-12. Now, where do you go next? We've been debating this since all this news happened, like last fall. We've talked the pros and cons of all the potential options a million times, and I don't really want to do all that again. I still contend that the best available option from a basketball and a football standpoint is Memphis. Memphis, I'm not sure they're super hyped on the possibility of having to move all of their Olympic sports across the country. I get that. But again, a lot like what I would say with UNLV, look around the rest of your league. Is this what you want to be committing to, for the next 10, 20 years, especially given how much is at stake right now and how much is evolving with the landscape and the playoff and access and the haves and the have-nots? Like that gap is only widening, and you want to be closer to the table than further away. So I don't see how you do that by committing to the American. But again, there's millions of dollars at play. I get it. There's just so many factors. But if the smoke is accurate, it sure seems like this is all leading to Texas State being who the Pac-12 adds for 2026. I'm not going to lie. They don't do much for me. I don't think they're a win necessarily, other than this allows you to at least keep the vision alive. You need another football member, point blank, period. Their buyout would be substantially less than some of these other options. Going with the affordable route to at least give yourself an opportunity to lay the foundation of the league and try and grow it up. I understand the logic of that. You just need a school at some point. I would just argue that if you were going to go Texas State, man, I'd rather have Wyoming football. I'd rather have New Mexico basketball. Like there are options in the Mountain West that would have been more appealing to me. Maybe that's my own personal biases. Again, the Mountain West is really all I've known, and I've got a lot of shared history with fans from these schools. I've got buddies that are being negatively impacted by this, and I admit that. I do have some personal biases when it comes to this whole conversation. I'm not a businessman. I'm not a TV executive. I understand the value from an exposure standpoint of having an institution in Texas. I understand the potential benefit from a recruiting standpoint of being able to say, when you go into a Texas school, hey, we're going to play some games in your home state. You're going to have an opportunity to, play in front of friends and family, a lot like what you're pitching on the NCAA video game when you're recruiting some of these guys. But I also think that Texas State's value in Texas is overblown. I think people in those communities are probably largely Texas Longhorns fans, Texas A&M fans. And to me, like that would be the equivalent of saying, well, you get the Denver market and access to Denver by adding UNC Greeley. And it's like, do you though? Do you? I just, they don't do much for me. I think they're a growing department. I think they could potentially be something down the line. And we have seen, their fan support increase. They've had some success, all of that. I'm highly skeptical of the vision with Texas State. I guess a wild card could be somebody like Sacramento State, who's going to the FBS level as an independent on the football side. They are spending a lot to try and increase their relevance nationally. They went out and they got Brennan Marion, the UNLV OC, and he's had a nice recruiting class. They went out and got Mike Bibby as a basketball coach. So like Sac State is taking some big swings, and in some ways you could argue that them betting on themselves and taking that type of big swing is not too dissimilar to like what CSU and Boise and San Diego State are feeling. There's levels to this, but they're just saying like, we're betting on ourselves being able to be in this conversation long term. We're going for it because we'd rather take that gamble than just sitting idle. I think not doing anything is a really dangerous spot to be in, and that's what I would argue against somebody like Memphis. Like UNLV, you've got that massive payday coming, so I can at least understand that. Like if you're Memphis, other than the exit fees, like what is keeping you in the American? Like what is the logic behind that? The last thing I'll say though, and then we can kind of get into some of the ESPN rankings and we got to take another break, is just that you got to remember that the next move is not necessarily the move. It's not necessarily the last move or anything like that. They got the schools they wanted to build the foundation of this league with: Oregon State, Washington State, and these 5 Mountain West schools. They went out and got Gonzaga in basketball. The brands that they felt very passionately about building around, particularly on this side of the country, they got those schools. It would have been cool to have UNLV, but I don't think you're losing sleep over it or anything like that. And I think you could still have access to Vegas even without them. But you got to remember, like at some point, you just have to add another member. Who knows what's going to happen long term with like the ACC? Maybe Stanford and Cal come back into play down the line. Maybe someone like the U of A or Arizona State like could come back in the mix, depending on what happens with the Big 12. This is chess. It's not checkers. It's not a one move thing. You're thinking 10 years down the line and not just the immediate future, other than the simple truth, which is just that you need an 8th football member. And so if you don't do that, none of this matters anyways. And so I get that. Like, I'm not trying to sit here and act like this was also easy or this would be some massiveness from the Pac-12 standpoint. I would love to hear, it'd probably have to be off the record. I doubt any of them would come on my show and tell me. I would love to pick like John Weber's brain or some of these other ADs on if they would do the whole thing the same way. Like in hindsight, maybe you should have had some of these pieces more in place before announcing. I don't know though. I'm not an expert. I think there's a lot of people here that try and act like they know everything, and they try and make it seem like they know every move that's going to occur down the line. And the truth is we don't. You're trying to make the best of what is an awkward situation. But does seem like, we can say pretty confidently now UNLV is not going to be in this vision. I think we still get that next football member at some point within the next month, hopefully, along with the media deal. So there's a lot to still be sorted out here. But I just wanted to give a couple of thoughts on that. We do have to take one last break, then we'll get into those ESPN win projections. Shout out to everybody in the Toyota chat, even the trolls. Let's get into those real quick. All right, on Thursday, June 5th, that's tomorrow, I guess, it's the 7th annual UC Health Healthy Swings Charity Home Run Derby. Broncos players like Cortland Sutton, Alex Singleton, and Marvin Mims will be stepping up to the plate to raise money. UC Health has donated over $900,000 to local charities over 6 iterations, supporting Coloradans with food insecurity, cancer screenings, and veterans' mental health challenges. This year's beneficiary is Freedom Service Dogs. Freedom Service Dogs provide service dogs to individuals with limited mobility, young adults with autism, veterans, and first responders to help disabilities like PTSD, traumatic brain injuries, and more. The DNVR Rams podcast is brought to you by UC Health, the preferred partner of athletes in Colorado. For inspiring health stories, go to uchealth.org for more info. UC Health, live extraordinary. I also would encourage you guys to become a DNVR diehard. We've got all kinds of fun opportunities coming up for diehards. We've got a Coors Field takeover coming up on the 8th for the Rockies Mets. Not much to sell on the Rockies standpoint, but chance to see Juan Soto in person. We've still got some seats available. And again, it's always a good time to go down to 20th and Blake and catch a ball game, eat a dog, put a couple Coors back, especially if you're with good people in the sunshine. There are far worse ways that you could spend a day. But if you become a DNVR diehard, you'll get opportunities, at the DNVR bar, discounts. You get a free shirt with your subscription. You get access to all of our premium content. If you've been on the fence, it is the best way possible to support us. So much love to everybody in Ram Nation that does support my content, but you'll get access to all that great DNVR stuff. Before we get into the ESPN projections, Sco says you can't tell the story of college football without Mike Leach. You can without Sonny. All right, if you're just going to be a douchebag, that's on you. It's also just a really ignorant comment. You don't know the history of the game, and I'm guessing you're one of the dorks who's been around for 2 years, and then you're bought into all of the propaganda that comes from the Dion cult, and good for you guys. It's great. Hopefully you get another 5-win season. Good on you. But yeah, it's just ignorant. You're dumb. Like, I wouldn't get on this podcast and besmirch somebody like Craig Bull from Wyoming. I wouldn't try and put down Bill McCartney because I recognize what he was. And that's the difference between the Dion dweebs and all of you losers in your fucking little cult, is that you're so far up your own asses. You don't even understand what happens around you. You don't understand there's a whole college football world that's so much greater than me. What's happening on me? Look at me in the mirror. Look at my pictures. Look at me. Fuck off. It drives me absolutely insane. Excuse my language. My apologies to everybody who I may have offended with it, but I don't think anybody in CSU Rams country is going to have any issue with me defending Sonny Lubick. And I just think you're a moron if you would argue against Sonny's legacy and you don't know what you're talking about. All right, let's get into the ESPN stuff. See if I can get the show back on rails here. See if I can get out of my feelings a little bit. If you missed it, ESPN projections give CSU a 73.5% chance of going bowling this year. They've got CSU projected at 6.7 wins, 5.5 losses. So leaning in that 6 to 7 win range, feeling like they are a little bit closer to the 7 win range. 7-5, probably a fair projection when you look at the schedule. We talked about it the other day, but the non-conference schedule on paper seems a little bit more manageable. You're not going to Texas, but the conference schedule is potentially going to be a little bit tougher. You do have to play UNLV and Boise this year. You were able to avoid both of them last year, which was a big benefit to you. The metrics from ESPN standpoint and Vegas seem to be far higher on Fresno State than I am. So you got to remember all of these are going to factor into the conversation here with projected wins. It's not just returning talent. It's, how are you going to benefit from the schedule? All of that kind of stuff. FPI gives CSU a 4.2% chance to win the Mountain West and a 1.3% chance to make the college football playoff. If you won the Mountain West, I would be very surprised if you didn't make the CFP. So it is a little bit interesting to me that those numbers aren't closer. I'm not a math guy. I'm sure somebody could explain that better than me. The metrics in Vegas, like I said, they are higher on Fresno and UNLV than I am. I think UNLV had some nice pieces to work with, and they've gone out and they've signed some nice players, but I was a little bit surprised that they're projected at 9.7 wins, a little over Boise State, who's at 9.6. They've got UNLV at basically a 98% chance going to a bowl, Boise 98% as well. They've got San Jose State at 6.9 wins with a 77% chance of a bowl, 6.8 for Fresno, 6.1 for Hawaii. They've got New Mexico at 5 wins, which is a little bit higher than Vegas was on them. And I actually talked about that when we were talking about some of the win totals. They are a wild card for sure. Jason Eck has essentially built like an FCS all-star roster, getting a bunch of dudes that were big-time playmakers out of the Big Sky. He came over from Idaho, so it makes sense. I could see New Mexico and Utah State being a little bit better than most would assume. New Mexico did lose a ton of talent, and Utah State as well. But I loved that Utah State went and got Bronco Mendenhall. I think that's about as good of a hire as you could hope for. I also think you can kind of replicate with the Aggies some of what allowed Mendenhall to be successful at UNM last year with Devin Dampier. I think you can do that with Bryson Barnes, who not the best arm in the world. He's more of a guy who's going to beat you with his legs. He almost did single-handedly in that CSU Utah State matchup last year. You got to remember Mendenhall is going to scheme to their strengths. He's a really good football coach. He knows this region. He knows these teams. So I'm a little bit more bullish on Utah State, New Mexico than the general consensus. I'm not as high on UNLV or Fresno State as ESPN's metrics are, or the Vegas win totals. San Diego State's a coin flip to me. I could see them going a variety of different ways. I think Sean Lewis was a good hire. I don't know what that offense is going to look like. Losing Danny O'Neal was a tough break. You bring over Senegal or whatever his name is, Jaden Senegal, the former Michigan quarterback who's a great athlete, beast of a runner. Maybe they kind of go into a triple option type offense or something like that. Just try and lean on that ground and pound, go full Tim Tebow QB power 5-6 times a game. That could work for them. But they did lose some talent at the skill position to the portal. Air Force and Wyoming being at the bottom with Nevada, it looks wrong. I can't say that I don't disagree with it, but Air Force's win total being at 4.5, Wyoming 4.1, which is with Nevada, it just feels so weird. And I think that's just because of how scorned I am from CSU's standpoint over the last 10, 15 years. Have not had very much success in those front range matchups. But I mean, you look at how hard those teams played, even as bad as they were at the end of last season. That does make me think they could maybe be a little better than expected. Air Force more so than Wyoming, just because Air Force is going to have continuity under center and in the backfield. And when they do, historically, they tend to at minimum be a bowl team, if not make a massive jump. I mean, we've seen Air Force go from winning 2 games in 2013 to 10 in 2014. That continuity, that experience, when they have that, it's probably more valuable for them than anybody else in the conference, just because the wonkiness of their system. When you have guys that are familiar with each other and they've got that chemistry, that rapport, it makes it tough to stop. That it just takes live game rips to be able to establish that. I do wonder if CSU kind of caught Air Force at the perfect time last year. They were still struggling. They closed that game strong. They made Ram fans sweat for sure. But they went 4-0 to finish the year after some struggles early in the season. And it just wouldn't shock me if we looked up in November and Air Force is like a 7 or an 8 win team. Like, it's possible that the NIL era has finally just caught up to them, and what Calhoun had been doing these last couple of years was unrealistic to expect him to be able to sustain it and to maintain it. But I don't know. I'm going to believe in Calhoun for too long rather than too short. Ryan Russillo would talk about that with Saban and Bama a lot. Like, they lose one game and everybody's so quick to proclaim it as the end of an era. They're done, stick a fork in them. And it's like, all right, like, maybe let's see if they have 2-3 bad years in a row before we just claim that program's dead and it's never going to be what it was. I do think there's a lot of factors that'll work against Air Force in the modern era that they didn't have to necessarily worry about in the past. And maybe that levels the playing field. Maybe that makes it harder. But Calhoun he's a winner, man. And I'm just not going to bet against him. I'm not going to do it. So quit asking. All right. Before we get out of here, just a couple of final thoughts. I put this in quotations, emptying the chamber. Got a fun Stanley Cup series starting tonight. Edmonton, Florida. Been talking about it a lot on the Avalanche side. I've got Edmonton in 7. I just feel like this is a moment for Connor McDavid where he kind of solidifies his status. We all know from a talent standpoint, he's as good as anybody that's ever played the game. But I think this is kind of where he adds that key moment to his legacy. I think Edmonton gets it done. It's hard for me to go against the toughness of Florida. They just bully you, man. They just beat you up for 60 straight minutes. I'm really, really excited for that one. I think OKC, Indiana has the potential to be a pretty fun series on the NBA side of things. I fear that OKC has a level that Indiana can't match, and their ability to muck it up and dictate the tempo. I just wonder how Indiana responds if it's OKC who's dictating the pace of the matchup. Indiana wants it to be more of like a fast-paced shootout. OKC can slow it down. Last thing I'm going to say, though, before we get out of here, because it drives me insane. And I wrote about this in the newsletter this morning. It's just that it annoys me so much how much TV ratings have become a part of the day-to-day sports debate. And like, you'll see people like Stephen A. Smith and First Take bringing it up and having it supposed to be like an actual thing that should matter to sports fans. Unless you're a TV executive, who cares? These leagues have long-term TV contracts, first of all. So it's dishonest, first of all. Like, it's intentionally, leaving out very important context, and that's that the game-to-game ratings really don't matter because the NBA has that long-term deal in place. But really, like, in principle, who cares? Just be a sports fan. Stop being a weirdo. Social media, First Take, have just made so many annoying dialogues. It's created so many dumb debates. It's made, I don't know, it's just emboldened the dumbest people, like the morons who come in this show and troll and try and degrade Sonny Lubick. Congrats. You got under my skin on that one. You won that battle. But I don't know. I don't understand why people talk about TV ratings. Who cares? Are you a TV executive? Does it impact your bottom line? No? Then shut up and enjoy the sports. Like, what does it matter what the market size is? I just don't understand why people think this is something that should be a flex. Like, if you're a Knicks fan, you're going to troll the Pacers. Oh, so many more people would have watched the Knicks. Great. You lost the series. Who cares? We're going to enjoy our championship. You enjoy those TV figures. It's a lot like the CU stuff. Congrats. 5 million people watched you lose. Awesome. Good stuff. That's all I've got for you guys. Shout out to everybody for supporting the content. We'll be back tomorrow, 10 a.m. Much love to our super producer, Alyssa, behind the scenes, making all of this work. Much love to all you guys for supporting the content, even in the deepest part of the off season. Always proud to be y'all. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.